It's time to see where Lucy's been swallowed to. Time for Chapter 8, The Wallab. Lucy was sinking deeper and deeper. Every now and then the floor beneath her bed would stop swallowing her, and the dark, spongy walls around her would loosen and tighten before pulling her down again. She imagined that this was what it must feel like to be eaten whole by a giant snake. Wherever Lucy was going, whatever this Wallab place was, it felt like she was being sucked through some sort of wormhole, travelling not only down below her bed, but also across time and space itself. She began to feel a little queasy, like the time she'd been training for the family jelly baby eating competition and she'd puked on her shoes. She couldn't quite put her finger on why or how, but everything she knew to be real and safe was suddenly uncertain. Up was down, left was right, this way was that. Her mind was spinning with dizziness, and not in a good way. Like when you spin around and round in the park and fall over laughing. It was more like the dizziness you get when you ride a roller coaster too many times and feel like your head is stuck to the ground and you can't stand up. Lucy's arms soon started feeling wobbly and tired. Her legs felt like they were made of mashed potato, and she realised she was losing her fight with the floor. But oddly enough, the very second Lucy stopped struggling and wriggling, the wall seemed to let her go. Her feet came out first as she plopped out of the hole and fell a few metres, but before she landed she stopped in mid-air, just hovering, like one of those astronauts on the International Space Station. Yep, Lucy was floating just above the ground. Except the ground wasn't beneath her feet now, it was above. Her head and everything was the wrong way up. The moment Lucy realised this, she went toppling up to it with a wet thud, landing next to the hole she'd plopped out of. Lucy was in the Wallab. Whatever the Wallab is, she muttered. She stood up, which was now down, brushed herself off, which was now on, and her head began to feel all twisted with this backwardsness. She took a step forward, which was now backwards, and stumbled a little bit as the ground wobbled underneath her bare feet. It was the strangest thing she'd ever stepped on. It felt warm, damp and squelchy, like standing on a giant tongue. Oh, yuck, thought Lucy. I wish I'd worn my slippers. That's the thing about having adventures in the middle of the night. You can never be fully prepared for them. The air was hot and misty down here in this soggy corridor, and Lucy felt her t-shirt began to stick to her arms and back. She slicked her fringe out of her eyes and it stayed there, stuck in place on the side of her forehead by small drops of sweat. The walls were slightly rounded, with ridges on them that arched up over Lucy's head, as though she was standing in a giant throat. Oh, the thought made her shiver. It also stank. It was so disgustingly rotten that Lucy could feel her eyes watering, and she had to hold her nose. Suddenly the hole by her feet started wobbling like mud-flavoured jelly, and Lucy noticed a small wooden signpost next to it with one word written on it. Dunstan. Her surname. And Lucy recognised the writing instantly. It was the same sticky brown writing that had been used in the letter she'd found pinned to the school door. So the Creakers wrote that letter, she muttered to herself as she studied the messy handwriting. The hole wobbled again, and a moment later she heard voices echoing through it. Voices and laughter and cackling. The Creakers! They must be following me down, she gasped. Lucy had no choice but to keep moving deeper into the Wallab, or they would catch up to her and snatch her. She started running as best she could, but it was like being on a bouncy castle or in those dreams when you're running and you're just not getting anywhere. Lucy puffed and panted, and her chest felt tight as she struggled for breath. I've got to slow down. Oh, she realised that. Then, just like the backwardness of the upside-down floor, as Lucy slowed down and began walking, everything suddenly felt easier, and she realised she could move faster. She only managed to sprint a few slow steps before her foot hit something, tripping her up. She bounced on the wobbly wet ground with a disgusting squelch, and as she came to a halt, out of the corner of her eye, Lucy caught sight of the thing that tripped her. It was another small wooden signpost in the squishy floor, just like the one she had seen with her surname on it. When Lucy read what this sign said, her heart leapt with hope. It said Quirk in exactly the same sloppy brown writing, and next to the signpost she saw a small hole just like the one that she'd plopped out of. Norman Quirk! Oh, that has to be Norman's house through there. Lucy thought as she peered into the small opening she could just make out a dark bedroom at the other end of it. Lucy looked around and saw another signpost just a few metres away, and then another and another. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of these little wooden signposts dotted all around her, stretching into the distance of the Wolleb, poking out of the steamy mist like tombstones in a graveyard. She began to read all the names sprawled on them. Annoying, Badding, Payne, Green, Trundle, Cobblesmith. It's Clutter Avenue, she realised. As she stared at the positions of these signs, Lucy could tell that they all matched perfectly with the houses and streets and buildings of Whittington town. Next to each post was its own small round opening, like a portal joining this backwards place with the world above. "Oh, that little kidderin!" a menacing grunt echoed off the wet walls. "You're not supposed to be down here in the Wolleb." Lucy spun around through the mist, and she saw 4 pairs of small black beady eyes staring at her. Her heart froze mid-beat. She could barely make out these 4 creatures through the haze, but their piercing eyes were enough to make her want to get as far away as possible from them. Quickly she looked around at the long, wet, twisted root of the Wolleb, which seemed to go on and on deeper into the ground. "Oh, I don't fancy going down there," she thought. "Good idea, Lucy." Although what Lucy didn't know was that in a few chapters she would be going deeper into the Wolleb. "What?" Lucy thought. "Nothing, Lucy. Carry on, you're about to escape." "Okay," thought Lucy. She took a deep breath, slicked her fringe over, and dived headfirst into the jelly-like hole next to Norman Quirk's signpost, hoping, wishing, praying that it led to her world. "She's crawling back up!" one of the Creakers hissed from somewhere behind her. "Too late to get her now," grumbled another. "We'll have to snatch her tomorrow." Another one creaked, and then the wobbly walls grabbed her and sucked her in deeper, and Lucy could no longer hear them. The sensation of going back down, or was it up? I don't know. The tight, squishy wormhole was just as weird as when it had swallowed her the first time. Lucy closed her eyes tight and held her breath as the walls wriggled and twisted like they were alive, pushing her along until they spat her into the darkness underneath another bed. She opened her eyes. Her heart was pounding, and her breath came in shaky gasps. She was back in Whittington, in someone else's bedroom. "Hello," she whispered, but there was no reply. She crawled out from under the bed, and her legs wobbled as she stood up in the small room, still feeling the effects of the backwards Wolleb. The room was covered with all sorts of bits and bobs, from maps and camping stoves to fishing rods and rope ladders, and the biggest collection of transformer toys Lucy had ever seen. There was also an iron and an ironing board with a neatly pressed badge-covered uniform ready for the morning, and hanging on the wall was a photo of a young boy and his father, both in full Scout uniforms, holding a huge fish with them, and even bigger smiles stretched across their proud faces. Definitely Norman's house, thought Lucy, and raced for the door. "Norman! she called, running downstairs as fast as she could. She yanked open the front door, and to her surprise she was blinded by sunlight as it engulfed her face with warm kindness. It was morning! "Lucy?" Norman said, waking up in his hammock and shielding his eyes from the sun. "Monsters under the bed again?" he asked. "No, creakers," Lucy replied. The hammock swung and swayed as Lucy climbed up next to Norman and told him all about it. How interesting. Come back next time to find out what happens.